Picture this scenario. You wake up, and before your feet even touch the floor, you feel it, that heavy fog. Maybe it's anxiety, maybe it's just a low hum irritation. You haven't checked your phone, you haven't spoken to a soul, but your internal weather report is already forecasting a storm. Now, the self-help gurus, and let's be honest, our own internal critics, would tell you that you have the power to just flip a switch, to choose joy, to manifest a better morning. But is that actually true? Or is that state, that morning fog, the inevitable result of biology, environment, and 1,000 tiny variables completely outside your control? Today, we are staring down one of the oldest philosophical debates in history, but we are dragging it out of the ivory tower and right into your morning commute. Are we the architects of our daily state, or are we just living in a house built by circumstances? I'm Layla, and this is The Deep Dive. Joining me to dismantle this question is Maggie, who has spent years analyzing the intersection of behavioral psychology and neuroscience. Maggie, welcome back.
It is such a pleasure to be here, Layla. And I love that you started with that morning fog example, because it is the universal human experience. We all want to believe we are the captains of our souls, right? That Henley poem Invictus feels good to recite. But the data tells a much more complicated and honestly, a much more forgiving story.
Forgiving is an interesting word choice there. It suggests that maybe we're carrying a lot of guilt about our bad moods. But before we get to the forgiveness part, let's look at the hardwiring. If I wake up grumpy, how much of that was written before I even opened my eyes?
A significant amount. If we look at the biological baseline, we have to talk about the circadian rhythm and cortisol. Research published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism has shown for years that cortisol, the stress hormone, naturally spikes in the morning. It's called the cortisol awakening response, or CAR. For some people, due to genetics or just the quality of sleep they got the night before, that spike is like a tsunami. You aren't choosing to be anxious. Your body is literally flooding your system with alert signals to get you out of bed. That is a physiological event, not a moral failure.
So right off the bat, we are fighting chemistry. But I want to push back on the idea that this makes us passive victims. Because even if the chemicals are surging, don't we have a cognitive override switch? I'm thinking of the Stoics here. Epictetus famously said, "Men are not disturbed by things, but by the view which they take of them." Just because the cortisol is high, does that mean the mood is fixed? Can't I interpret that physical sensation as excitement rather than anxiety?
That is the million-dollar question. You are touching on what psychologists call cognitive reappraisal. And yes, technically you can reframe physiological arousal. A study out of Harvard Business School actually found that telling yourself, "I am excited" when you are nervous is more effective than telling yourself, "Calm down." But here is the catch, and it is a big one. Cognitive reappraisal requires a functioning prefrontal cortex. That's the executive center of the brain. If you are sleep deprived, if you are chronically stressed, or if you are hungry, the connection between your emotional brain, the amygdala, and that regulating prefrontal cortex is weakened. So the Stoic ideal is beautiful, but it biologically requires a well-resourced brain to execute. If you are running on empty, you physically might not have the fuel to flip that switch.
That creates a terrifying feedback loop. You need energy to regulate your state, but a bad state drains your energy. It feels like a rigged game. Let's zoom out from the biology for a second and look at the environment. We aren't just biological machines. We are social animals living in a very specific context. How much of our daily state is actually just us absorbing the ambient stress of the world?
Massively. We are porous. We leak emotions into each other. There is a phenomenon known as emotional contagion. It was famously demonstrated in a massive study involving Facebook data a few years back, where they tweaked the algorithms to show more positive or negative posts. They found that users who saw more negative content produced more negative content themselves, and that was just through a screen. In physical proximity, it is even more intense. If you walk into a workplace where your boss is radiating stress, your mirror neurons, the neurons that help us empathize and learn through imitation, will pick that up. You will start to simulate their stress state in your own body. You didn't choose to be stressed. You caught it like a cold.
That makes the concept of personal responsibility regarding our mood seem almost unfair. If I catch a bad mood from my partner or the news and my biology is spiking my cortisol, where is the room for agency? It sounds like you are arguing for a form of soft determinism, that we are just pinballs bouncing off bumpers we didn't place.
I would argue it is not about eliminating agency, but relocating it. We tend to think agency happens in the moment of the mood. Like, I feel bad, I will now choose to feel good. That is the trap. The true agency happens in the architectural choices we make before the mood hits. It is about environment design. If I know I am susceptible to emotional contagion, my choice isn't to resist the bad mood. My choice is to curate my feed or set boundaries with that toxic coworker or prioritize sleep so my prefrontal cortex is online. The choice is in the setup, not the reaction.
Okay, I like that distinction. Agency as preparation rather than reaction. But let's look at the cultural legacy of this. We live in a society, particularly in the West, that is obsessed with the self-made man, the master of one's destiny. If we accept your premise that we are largely products of biology and environment, what does that do to our concept of success? Because if a CEO says, I wake up at 4 a.m. crushing it every day, we applaud their discipline. If we view it through your lens, maybe they just have a lucky genetic mutation regarding cortisol regulation.
You have hit the nail on the head. We moralize biology constantly. We treat high energy and consistent mood as virtues rather than fortunate physiological traits. There is fascinating research on the short sleeper gene, DEC2. People with this mutation can function perfectly on 4 hours of sleep. They are often overrepresented in high-powered leadership roles because they literally have more hours in the day and less fatigue. We look at them and say, wow, what willpower. But really, it is just DNA. When we fail to acknowledge these external factors, we create a culture of shame for everyone else who needs 8 hours and wakes up groggy.
That moralization is everywhere. Good vibes only. It implies that if you have bad vibes, you're doing something wrong. You are failing at being human. But I want to play devil's advocate here. If we lean too hard into the it's just my biology or it's just my environment narrative, don't we risk total passivity? I worry that people could use this as a permission slip to be miserable or to treat others poorly. Sorry I yelled at you, my cortisol is high and the news is bad. Where is the line between understanding the cause and abdicating responsibility?
That is the critical danger zone. Explanation is not excuse. Understanding that your irritability comes from a cortisol spike or a lack of protein doesn't give you the right to be cruel. The nuance lies in metacognition, thinking about your thinking. The goal of understanding these external factors isn't to say, I can't help it. It is to say, I notice I am feeling irritable. I know this is likely because I skipped lunch and read a scary headline. Therefore, I will not trust this feeling as an absolute truth about my life, and I will keep my mouth shut until I eat. The agency is in the gap between the feeling and the behavior.
So the feeling might be dictated by external factors, but the behavior remains a choice. That seems like a fair compromise. But let's dig deeper into the technical side of how we can widen that gap. You mentioned metacognition. Is that something we can train, or is the ability to step back and observe yourself also dependent on luck and genetics?
It is absolutely trainable, though. Yes, some people have a head start. Mindfulness meditation is the gym for this. And I don't mean that in a spiritual woo-woo sense. I mean strictly neurologically. Studies using fMRI scans, like those conducted by researchers at Massachusetts General Hospital, have shown that consistent mindfulness practice actually increases the density of gray matter in the hippocampus, known for learning and memory, and decreases the density of the amygdala, the stress center. You are literally physically remodeling your brain to be less reactive to those external factors. So while you cannot stop the wave of emotion, you can build a better surfboard.
I love the surfboard analogy, but let's look at the water itself. We are swimming in a digital ocean that is engineered to manipulate our state. We talked about emotional contagion, but it is more aggressive than that. Tech companies employ attention engineers to hijack our dopamine systems. If a team of PhDs at a tech giant is designing an algorithm specifically to make me outraged or anxious so I keep clicking, can I really say my state is mine?
That is the scariest frontier of this debate. We are bringing a knife to a nuclear fight. Tristan Harris and the Center for Humane Technology have documented this extensively. The variable ratio schedule of reinforcement, that is the slot machine mechanic used in social media feeds, is designed to bypass your conscious choice and trigger a compulsion. When you are in a compulsion loop, you are not choosing your state. You are being played. In that context, our daily state is not just dictated by external factors, it is being strip mined for profit. The outrage, the anxiety, the comparison, that is the product.
That is incredibly bleak. It suggests that our internal landscape is being colonized. So, if we are up against biology, social contagion, and predatory algorithms, what does a realistic victory look like? Is it just carving out small pockets of autonomy? Or can we actually reclaim the whole territory?
Total reclamation might be a fantasy, but we can definitely reclaim territory. It goes back to that architectural agency. If you know the phone is a slot machine that steals your peace, you don't rely on willpower to ignore it, you put it in another room. You change the physical parameters. A realistic victory is increasing the percentage of time you spend in a responsive state versus a reactive state. If right now you are 90% reactive, just bouncing off what total reclamation might be a fantasy, but we can definitely reclaim territory. It goes back to that architectural agency. If you know the phone is a slot machine that steals your peace, you don't rely on willpower to ignore it, you put it in another room. You change the physical parameters. A realistic victory is increasing the percentage of time you spend in a responsive state versus a reactive state. If right now you are 90% reactive, just bouncing off whatever hits you, and you get that down to 70%, that is a massive quality of life improvement. We are looking for incremental gains in autonomy, not perfect control.
Let's shift gears to the historical context. Has this struggle always been this hard? I imagine a farmer in the 17th century had a very different set of external factors dictating their state: weather, crop failure, plague. Are we uniquely vulnerable today, or has the nature of the external forces just shifted?
The nature of the threat has shifted from acute to chronic. The 17th century farmer faced existential physical threats: starvation, freezing to death. Those produce high stress, but usually in response to immediate physical reality. Today, our threats are psychological and constant. We have micro stressors: an email that sounds passive aggressive, a news alert about a war thousands of miles away, a notification that your bank balance is low. Our nervous systems treat these psychological threats with the same biological mechanism used for saber-toothed tigers. We are running the same software, but the operating environment is completely mismatched. That mismatch causes chronic inflammation and chronic anxiety, which the farmer might not have experienced in the same way, despite their harder physical life.
That evolutionary mismatch theory explains so much. We are hypervigilant for tigers, but we are just getting pinged on Slack. I want to bring up a controversial perspective here. There is a school of thought, mostly in the rigid determinist camp, that says even our attempt to fix this, to listen to this podcast and try to change, is also predetermined, that we are just biological robots playing out a script. Does that perspective hold any water for you, or is it just intellectual nihilism?
It is a valid philosophical stance popularized by thinkers like Sam Harris. The argument is that if you rewind the tape of the universe and play it again, everything would happen exactly the same way because every effect has a cause. If you choose to turn off your phone tonight, it is because a specific combination of neurons fired, which fired because you heard this podcast, which you heard because, and so on. It's hard to refute logically. However, pragmatically, it is useless. Even if free will is an illusion, it is a necessary illusion. We function better when we believe we have the wheel. Psychological studies on locus of control show that people who believe they have agency, an internal locus of control, have better health outcomes, lower depression, and higher achievement. So even if the determinists are right, we are better off acting as if they are wrong.
That is the ultimate irony. We might be programmed to need the illusion that we aren't programmed. Let's ground this again. We have listeners right now who are feeling that fog we talked about at the start. They are midway through their day. Maybe things have gone off the rails. Based on this mix of biology, environment, and limited agency, what is the most effective thing they can do right now to alter their state? Not a permanent fix, but a pivot.
Change the sensory input. Your brain is a prediction machine, constantly sampling the environment to decide how you should feel. If you are sitting still, staring at a screen in a dark room, your brain is predicting stagnation and threat. You need to jar the system. The quickest way is physiological. Cold water on the face, it triggers the mammalian dive reflex, which slows the heart rate. Or optical flow, literally walking forward and having objects pass by your peripheral vision. Stanford neuroscientist Andrew Huberman talks about this often. Optical flow suppresses the amygdala. You can't think your way out of a bad state, but you can move your way out of it. You have to use the body to signal the brain.
I find that so empowering because it bypasses the intellect. You don't have to convince yourself the world is good. You just have to trick your nervous system into calming down. But I want to go back to the social aspect. We talked about contagion. If we are susceptible to others, does that mean we also have a responsibility to be the good contagion? Are we obligated to be the thermostat, not the thermometer?
That is a beautiful way to put it. The thermostat sets the temperature, the thermometer just reflects it. Yes, I think that is the hidden superpower in this conversation. If we acknowledge that we are all porous and affecting one another, then regulating your own state is actually an act of public service. When you can stay calm in a chaotic meeting, you are literally offering a biological anchor for everyone else in the room. Their mirror neurons can latch onto your stability. So self-regulation isn't selfish, it's communal. By hacking your own biology, you are improving the ecosystem for everyone else.
That reframes self-care completely. It's not indulgence, it's sanitation. You are cleaning up the emotional pollution you would otherwise be dumping into the room. But I have to ask about the limits of this. What about people living in truly oppressive external circumstances? Poverty, war, systemic discrimination. Is it fair to discuss choosing your state or even architectural agency in that context?
Crucial distinction. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is non-negotiable. If you are unsafe, starving, or systemically oppressed, your body is correctly identifying a threat. In those cases, choosing your state is an insulting concept. The negative state is the appropriate biological response to an unacceptable reality. The focus there shouldn't be on the individual finding inner peace. It should be on changing the external reality. This conversation about optimizing agency is a privilege that exists only after basic safety and survival are met. We cannot therapy our way out of structural injustice.
Thank you for making that clear. It prevents this from becoming toxic positivity. It seems like the summary of our debate is a tension. We are far less in control than we think, but that tiny slice of control we do have is more powerful than we realize if applied correctly. We are surfing a wave we didn't create on a board we didn't build, but we can still steer.
Exactly. We are negotiating with reality, not dictating it. The daily state is a collaboration between your DNA, your breakfast, your news feed, your sleep, and yes, your conscious intent. When you stop fighting the external factors and start managing them, treating them like weather rather than a personal failing, you actually gain more maneuverability. You stop wasting energy on guilt and start using it for adjustment.
Maggie, this has been a masterclass in dismantling the myth of total control while still handing us the keys to the car. Before we wrap up, is there one final thought or a specific piece of research that you think encapsulates this dance between choice and circumstance?
I often think about the work of Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor. In the most horrific external circumstances imaginable, he identified the last of the human freedoms to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. But I pair that with modern neuroscience that says protect your brain so you have the strength to make that choice. It's a partnership between the lofty human spirit and the fragile biological machine. Honor both. Honor the spirit, respect the machine. That is a powerful place to land. We spend so much time trying to conquer our biology or escape our environment, but maybe the answer is just to understand the mechanics well enough to work with them. If you woke up in a fog today, know that it's not a verdict on your character. It's just data. Check your inputs, adjust your architecture, and ride the wave.